Do you have a sporting aspiration, however, find yourself stuck? Is it fear of failure or self-doubt holding you back? Or do you simply just don't know where to start? This episode of Me and My Health Up will provide you insight into what might be holding you back from achieving your sporting goals. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher, clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. Today, we'll be chatting with Jen Brown, a performance and wellbeing expert. Jen is also an endurance sports coach and the founder of Sparta Chicks, an online community and coaching businesses that support women who participate in endurance sports and outdoor adventures by sharing experiences, honest conversations and practical tools so that they can tap into their inner strength and chase their goals and dreams with confidence. Jen started her career as a corporate lawyer, however now specialises in coaching women to overcome their self-doubt and achieve their sporting goals, and is now an author, speaker and host of Sparta Chicks Radio podcast. So welcome, Jen. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I am very well. The sun is shining and makes lockdown just a wee bit easier, I think.
Yeah, but you must be, I guess there's certain aspects of your training that you'd be able to keep up, right? And then there's others that are probably a bit restricted on what you can do around that.
Yes, I tend to get out at sunrise, so I've still been able to get out for a walk or a run at sunrise. But my swimming, let's just say all the motivation I've gained from watching the Olympics is kind of sadly going to waste. But you know, I'll get there eventually. I'll get back in a pool eventually.
Has been very inspiring to watch these elite athletes and achieve amazing things and do incredible things with their body. And it's really been nice to watch that whilst we're locked down here in Sydney. I'm really intrigued with this corporate lawyer transition to what you're doing today. So please share your story. I'd love to hear it.
Looking back on it, I can see how people, what am I trying to say? It's almost unbelievable, even to me. I think the transition in my career. So I was a corporate lawyer for almost 12 years, and then took a very sharp right turn into personal training and endurance sports coaching. The reason for that sharp right turn, I think, was twofold. One was increasing dissatisfaction with life as a lawyer, both in terms of, shall we say, micromanagement, the way law firms traditionally operate. This was going back 10 years ago now, so I know there are a lot of firms doing things differently these days. Love the work, love the clients, but just did not love the lifestyle. And at the same time I had been a lawyer, I discovered endurance sports. It started actually in the gym as doing weight training, and then discovered running. And I think it was this situation where increasing dissatisfaction with law crossed paths with increasing interest in sport performance. And I think I'd had a pretty turbulent career as a runner up to that point. I was constantly injured, just niggling, juggling one niggle to the next. And eventually I started working with a physio who was also a Pilates instructor. And I realised all the mistakes that I had been making, and I could see all the same mistakes my friends were making. And so it wasn't quite a sliding doors moment, but it was a time in my life when the two paths converged. And I took the path, I actually decided to take the path when I was sitting on a hillside in Nepal. I'd just gone on holidays to Nepal, and as you tend to do in holidays like that, you tend to sort of step back and think big picture and see big picture. And I just thought to myself, I can't go back to law. I cannot. I am done with law. I'm burnt out of it. What else am I going to do? And so I had to go back to law because I'd actually spent all my money on the holiday. But I went back to law for a little while, but it was time to put the transition plan in place. And it wasn't an easy transition for me. It probably took me 18 months from the time of decision to the time of outing or leaving and setting up my own business. But God, it was worth it. It was so worth it.
And so please share what you do today in more detail, because I obviously gave a brief outline, but there's a lot more to what you do today.
So I describe it as I wear two hats, essentially. So one of the hats I wear is that I am an endurance sports coach and I run Sparta Chicks. So I work with everyday people like you and I, people, amateur athletes, people balancing work and kids and commitments and all the things, and who have some goals related to, it might be running or triathlon, cycling, swimming, outdoor adventures. So whether that's a trek to base camp or climbing Kilimanjaro. And so part of my time I spend working with people like that, which I love, helping them achieve their goals. And then the other hat I wear is this Performance and Wellbeing Expert hat. And so I work with busy, driven, results-focused professional people, men and women, to help them unlock what I think of as untapped potential. I truly believe, and I have seen this through my 10 years of sports coaching, that we are all capable of so much more than we can possibly imagine. And so basically what I do is I've taken everything I've learned about mindset, navigating fear, self-doubt and confidence, how to develop resilience and endurance, how to perform at your best, how to create to manage your energy, and share that now with busy, ambitious, results-focused people in corporate space.
Fantastic. I think it's much needed because, there's that, people have these ambitions, like they're watching the Olympics, for example, and they're thinking, I was watching the rock climbing the other night. So take that, for example, the rock climbing, and you're thinking, wow, how can they do that? That's amazing. And it might spark some interest in them, but then they're thinking about, I don't have the flexibility. I'm not strong. I couldn't do that. And so this self-doubt sets in, and they're thinking, I've tried various things before and I've failed at it. And they can really sort of give up on their aspirations. And really what I've wanted to discuss with you today is how to help people overcome that self-doubt, those limiting beliefs, and essentially help them get started. So it's how do you shift that mindset in someone, or how does a person help shift their own mindset, and then be able to start out, and where should they start and how they should go about it, given that the you take what you do around endurance sports, it can be seen as daunting, but really I'd love to say I've accomplished that, but I just, where do I start when it's like a 4-kilometre swim, a 180k bike ride, and then, back it up with a marathon? It can be overwhelming. So please start with these barriers that we have, typical barriers that you see with clients, and then how you work with them to overcome some of these obstacles, and then how you help them get started.
Such a big question, such a good question. I think the answer does depend to some extent on where what your starting point is. Where are you starting from? So if you are, starting at the very beginning, it's a new goal or a new sport, or something that you want to try for the first time. I think the biggest mistake we make is the size of the goal we set. We set such a big goal, or we compare ourselves to someone else so far ahead of us along that journey that it becomes daunting, and sometimes we never even start. I was speaking to someone recently who hadn't run in years, and she said, okay, that's it. You've inspired me. I'm going to go out and run for 30 minutes today. And I know this woman very well, so my answer to her was probably a little bit more flippant and direct than I might otherwise be. But I was like, no, you won't. I said, you will not go out and run. You will physically not be able to go out and run 30 minutes, because I know you, and I know you haven't run in 5 years. And I think that's one of the ways we sort of sabotage ourselves, is that we set these unrealistic goals. And if you are once someone who's starting out for the first time, getting off the couch, and you leave the house with the intention of running for 30 minutes and you can't even run for 3, well, it makes sense that you're going to throw your hands up and say, this was a stupid idea, I can't do this, and what was the point? So setting goals, realistic goals, like they might even seem so small that they're insignificant, but I really don't think they are. They're just stepping stones along the way. So the first thing is around the milestones. And I think one of the other big things, both for athletes or people who are new to any sport and certainly athletes much further down the track, is around comparison and expectations. So often we compare ourselves to someone better. So it's the classic comparing apples and oranges. We're comparing where we are to someone, we're comparing where we are, which might be at the very beginning, to someone who's been doing it 3 or 5 or 10, or in the case of the Olympians, 20 years. So making sure that we're keeping our comparisons, if you're going to compare yourself, very narrow. And one of my favourite comparison exercises is actually one I heard from Adam Grant, who wrote Think Again. He compares himself to who he was 3 years ago. And I think sometimes that's a much more positive, constructive comparison, especially when you're starting out. Or if you've been doing something a little bit of time and it's just at that point where it's starting to stick. Looking back at how far you've come is often more powerful and motivating and helpful and constructive than looking ahead or looking forward. And if I had to add one more thing to that list, it would be our expectations, especially the unspoken expectations that we have. Expectations will make you miserable. I found that to be true in various aspects of life, because I've had so many conversations with people over the years who, for example, the beginners who might expect to be able to run 30 minutes, or in more established athletes, they expect or they think they should. Anytime someone says should, it's like my little spidey senses get set off. But they think they should be faster or be able to be stronger, or they should have made more progress by now. And I think anytime you're sort of thinking to yourself the word should, there is massive scope for frustration and disappointment to set in, because often those expectations that we have set are not reasonable expectations.
I really like that, because I actually saw this quote one time which was talking about it's like a stress definition, and it said basically the definition of stress is the gap between expectations and reality, right? So you're essentially is exactly what you said. If you lower the expectations to the reality, then what are you worried about? It's good to and as you've probably realized, yes, you want to improve yourself and have that constant never-ending improvement, but not have that expectation that, as you said, is way ahead of where you're at. So if you're, as you said, around that comparison, like if you're comparing yourself to these Olympians, then of course you're going to feel, well, it's a long road ahead and so too daunting. I don't know where to start.
No, I was going to say, I think too, that you're right, there is this balance or continuum that exists between expectations and using expectations and comparison as a source of fuel and motivation. But there's a tipping point at which it almost becomes unhealthy or unhelpful. And I think that tipping point is where that expectation or comparison has crossed the line from being, helpful and realistic to optimistic and unhelpful.
Absolutely. I think a good example is that most recent sale of the founders of Afterpay that, sold their company for an incredible amount of money. And, it was only really in that sort of new company phase or, just beyond startup, and, done extremely well. And, some budding entrepreneurs can say, oh, I want that. And but, you know, there's obviously, you know, a long journey that those people went on in order to get to that outcome. And, yeah, it's not good, healthy comparison, because those founders would have been just focusing on what they can do to make that company better each day, as opposed to, you know, I'm expecting to sell this company for $39 billion.
Yeah. And I mean, even after pay sale, that was a 7-year process, never mind, you know, whatever skills that they had developed prior to that. And I sometimes think we forget the bigger picture. We look at, you know, the progress someone's made in the last 2 or 5 years, and we forget often that it's the culmination of 20 years of development and practice and gathering of expertise. I was reading this morning, there was an article around talking to Ariane Titmus's coach. And, you know, you would have seen this in endurance sports world. People will go, oh, look, there's an Ironman race, which is a 4-kilometre swim, 180-kilometre bike ride, 42-kilometre marathon, which I know you've done. But people will see that and go, oh, there's one in 12 months' time. I'm going to have a crack at that. And it's great and it's doable for some people. But in this interview I read with Ariane Titmus's coach, they started discussing these Olympics 5 years ago. And I do think sometimes, we see we forget essentially how much goes into those high-level newspaper gathering achievements, or even the achievements of our highly talented friends that sometimes make us really, you know, envious and jealous. It's not just the last 12 months that they dedicated to something. It's the years beforehand. And that can sound a little bit negative. Like, how can I ever catch up with someone who's been doing this for 10 years? But I think if we just keep that in the back of our mind while we set realistic expectations along the way, that's the most helpful way to approach the situation.
And I think it's also what you acknowledge is that everyone's completely unique in a sense. Their journey won't be the same as someone else's. Their end capability, even after 5 years, may not ever be, you know, and it's pointless comparing ourselves to this person, because they may have just focused on their unique strengths from an incredible young age, and, you know, developed them. And some people may be still finding that unique strength that they have. And so it's really, you know, if you're entering someone else's space where it's their strength that you'd like to have, but you don't have that, you know, we don't all have, you know, equal ability in the same areas, or, you know, in order to get that equal ability, you have to work for it, right? It's you know, and you might have to work a bit harder than that person because they naturally have it.
Yeah, and it comes back to, you know, focusing on you and your journey and how far you've come. And I think in Angela Duckworth's book Grit, she talks about how we as a culture seem to idolize talent and not hard work. We seem to discredit hard work and just idolize natural talent. And I think, like, everyone has an upper limit of the ability of their potential. And everyone has a you know, upper cap of their talent, and it's the hard work that separates the two. And without the hard work, it doesn't matter how much talent you've got, you'll never explore the upper limits of your potential. And so I think sometimes we dismiss the hard work that goes into things, and especially when I think high performers, the magic of high performance is they make really hard things look really easy. And I think that goes for, you know, Simone Biles on the beam last night, Ariane Titmus in the pool earlier in the week, through to the guys selling Afterpay. Like, that, it just looks easy from the outside, and it never is. And I think when we pay it, when we when we forget that, we do ourselves a disservice, because we know how hard it is. Like, we've all been there. We know how hard it is to set a goal to run for 30 minutes when you've never run before in your life. And you see these runners out there in the streets in the morning and they make it look so easy and you want to curse them. And look, sometimes we do. But there's a lot of hard work that's gone into that as well.
How do you suggest someone to start out, like, given they come to this realization that it is hard work ahead, but without them getting too overwhelmed by the amount of hard work, how do you suggest they start out so that they actually get started, they start on their journey rather than procrastinate and think, I just don't have the time for that hard work? So how do you help people get started?
I would say, firstly, find something that you enjoy, that you love. There's a little asterisk I will put in this bit of advice, but I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make, and it's also one of the best ways to make it easiest for ourselves, is to find something that you enjoy. If you don't like running, don't run. If you don't like swimming, don't swim. You don't have to. If you like riding mountain bike, go for it. So I think that's the easiest way to start, is actually to find something that you enjoy. Now, the little asterisk I mentioned to that is this. When you set out, running in particular, I think running, every sport to some degree, but from my personal experience, running highlights this more than anything. It's really hard. I had a break from running and I started again, and as a coach, it was actually painful and a great gift, because it reminded me how hard it is to start. But here's the beauty: if you stick with it long enough, there will come this magical day, the pieces will fall into place, you will find flow and joy, and you will be hooked. The challenge is just to find something that you love doing long enough to reach that magical day. So that's one of the first ones that I like to recommend, because there's so many people who want to get fit but think that they should run, for example, or should swim, or should do CrossFit or something. But if that doesn't float your boat, don't torture yourself.
But what about that, so they think, well, I love doing this, I'm going to do it. And then they're thinking about, oh, look, I've sort of done these things in the past and I failed at it, and, I'm not going to succeed or get to where I want to with this. How do you help people with letting go of that fear of failure from the past and just getting on with it? So can you give some tips around that?
That is such a great question. And I think it's something that's important for us to think about in all aspects of life, because it is our beliefs and the stories that we tell ourselves about what we can and can't do that sort of either underpin our performance or undermine our performance. So if you have tried to start running before and weren't able to sustain it, I would actually go back and maybe a little bit of a post-mortem about that previous experience. Like, how did you try? Like, what was the strategy you used? In hindsight, what mistakes do you think you made? What roadblocks did you have but didn't anticipate? How often were you running? Like, what distances were you running? I think the answer's there somewhere along the line, because I think, we have these situations where we try something, and then we don't do it, and then it becomes proof that we can't. And I don't believe that to be true. What I think we've done is just gone about it the wrong way. So I think the secret actually lies in looking back and going, okay, well, assuming I went about it the wrong way, and it's not a reflection of me, it's just a reflection of the strategy I use. Well, how do I need to change the strategy? What do I need to try differently? Is there someone I can talk to bounce ideas off and get their advice on? Did I do too much too soon? Do I think, how was my body feeling? Your body is always a great indicator if you listen to it. And most of us are not very good at listening to that, even those of us who have been around the traps a long time. So I think that's a great way to start to answer that question. And the second thing is to not just look at when you haven't done something, but the times that you have. The times that you have stuck to something, the times that you have shown up consistently, not just limited to sport, but in all aspects of life. I think one of the things we do is tend to silo the different parts of our life. And in doing so, we don't necessarily carry the lessons and insights and wisdom we've gained from each part of our life into other parts of our lives. So what are the times in your life where you have succeeded? What are the times in your life where you have been consistent, where you have stuck with something, where you have done something that you never thought you could do before? Look to those two, because I think the more we focus on those and the less we focus on the times we haven't done something, certainly the more positive, and I don't mean positive in like a rah-rah way, I mean positive in terms of constructive problem solving, focused on continuous improvement, growth mindset, learning perspective you'll get. And overall, the more you'll understand yourself and your body, which is invaluable as an athlete.
True. Obviously not to dwell on the failures, but look at where you've had successes, and as you said, learn from the failures. So take the learnings from the failures, but I guess then reflect on the wins that you've had, and build confidence from that. And then it is having those small wins and those small celebrations along the way that really helps you continue to grow into that area of, that you want to develop in.
That's a great point, actually, you make, and about celebrating wins, is that I think one of the things that does us the biggest disservice when it comes to our confidence and self-doubt, and it's inherent in the imposter syndrome as well, is not celebrating our wins. And when we don't celebrate our wins, our confidence doesn't grow, our identity doesn't change, how we see ourselves never grows with our achievements. And so accepting accepting praise, accepting compliments, celebrating the wins, even if it's just like the first time you run for 5 minutes, come home, fist pump, high five, like have a party, celebrate that sort of stuff, because that does help you shift how you think about who you are and what you are or are not capable of.
You mentioned imposter syndrome, and I know you do a lot of work with your clients around removing this imposter syndrome. So, please share some more as to what it is and some tips which, people have this imposter syndrome, of how they could potentially help that or remove that obstacle from their from what they want to achieve.
I could talk about this for days. I promise I won't. Okay, so the best way to start this conversation is actually to share what it looks like. How it shows up in your life, how it shows up in your head. And so it's normally thinking things like, I'm not ready, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve my success, I don't belong here, I only achieved that because of X reason. I was lucky, someone made a mistake, I managed to pull the wool over people's eyes, I managed to fool them, I'm just winging it, and any minute now someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, mate, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. So that's how it kind of shows up in most people's head, inside their head. Really, so it's actually been studied for over 40 plus years now, and it was first named the imposter phenomenon by two researchers back in the 70s. And incidentally, they studied 150 high-achieving women. And what they found was that these women could not internalize their success. They couldn't accept or acknowledge that the success that they had was a result of their expertise and experience and wisdom. And instead was due to the fact they were lucky, that someone had made a mistake, that they had a really common name, and someone made a mistake in the head office, or that they were winging it. They'd pull the wool over people's eyes. And so it's this disconnect really between how the world sees us and how we see ourselves. And ultimately it's between our competence and our confidence. Our competence is here, our confidence is lower. The whole world can see our competence, but we can't. So there's this massive gap between the two, and we just feel like we're a fraud because we're not as good as other people think we are. So that's how it tends to show up in the world. Now, I mentioned that study, the initial study was over 150 high-achieving women. The question I am most asked today is, can men get it? The answer is most certainly yes. More recent studies have shown that there was a study 10 plus years ago that said that found 70% of high-achieving people, male and female, will experience it at least once. More recently, there have been studies showing that up to 80% of people will experience it, both men and women. In fact, there's even been a few studies that have shown it in certain areas like academia that men experience it more. So the myth around it being a woman thing has certainly been discredited. In terms of how to go about it, I think the very first step is to notice it. That seems a little self-evident, I think, but sometimes, we have all these thoughts going on in our head and we don't even realise that we're saying it to ourselves because we have so many thoughts in a day. It's just this constant diatribe that's going on. So I think the first step is to notice it, to normalise it. So that is to go, actually, that's the imposter thing. It's normal that I would feel self-doubt or scared or uncomfortable in this situation. Another great tactic a lot of people use is to give it a name. So my favourite story along this point is by Australian ARIA Award winner Claire Bowditch, the singer. So she named her little inner critic Frank. Am I allowed to swear on your podcast? I didn't ask you at the start. Shall I beep it? So she shares in her book that when her inner critic, when the voice of this imposter gets too loud and opinionated, she actually says, F off, Frank, to the voice. And sort of by naming it, what you actually do is compartmentalize it a little bit. You make it separate from you. And it's surprisingly effective at how it doesn't get rid of the voice, but it like turns the volume down on it so that you can kind of go, okay, I hear you. I know what you're trying to do. You can just sit in the corner because I've got something that's important to me to do. And I think those three things are at least the first stage of overcoming it in the moment. I think the more you do that, the more you build up a bit of resilience and tolerance to it. But it is sort of a long process of rewriting what we believe about ourselves. So it's not easy, but know that you are not alone. Everyone else has experienced it at some point in time. And I think the more we can talk about it and the more we can share our experience, the less power it has over us as well.
Yeah, I think that was the key that you shared that tip around not saying it like so, not identifying it as you, identifying it as someone separate to you, and acknowledging that you're having that conversation with someone else. So it's not me, it's not who I am, it's not my identity. It's Frank. Hey, it's you. It's you. I know you're there.
I hear you. I know you're there. I hear you. You can be quiet now. I've got this. Yeah, that's one. There's 1,000 other things, tactics you can do. And I think the one tricky thing with the imposter is that it's a bit of a shapeshifter, and it will often show up in different ways at different times and in different parts of your life. So some people will experience it in certain phases of their work career, but never in other aspects of their life. I know some athletes who don't experience it but really struggle in terms of their sport, standing on the start line of a race, for example. I've spoken to some people who struggle with it as a parent. because it is this great unknown, and you really have no idea if you're bringing home your baby for the first time, you really are winging it, because you're really not, they don't come with manuals, not really. So it's knowing that it's likely to occur in any situation that is new to you, that any situation that kind of puts you towards the edge of the comfort zone, to expect it, and that how it shows up for you will be very different from how it shows up for me. So that's, I think, why you'll see lots of articles that are just like 5 tactics to overcome the imposter. And I'm reluctant to use that language, shall we say, because the tactics that work for you may not work for me. The one about naming it does seem to be pretty common across the board, but that's about the only one. So it's a very individual experience. But as I said, the more we can talk about it, the more we can share what works for us and what doesn't work, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, and I think it's a great segue into how you help people, essentially. So if you're stuck with this imposter syndrome and you need some help, then certainly reach out to Jen Brown. Jen, you have your own podcast where there's no doubt you talk about the imposter syndrome in detail and in many times over and various episodes. So, please share how listeners can connect with you, and then a little bit about your podcast.
Thank you. So there's two real places to find me. One is at Sparta Chicks, spartachicks.com, and Sparta Chicks on all the handles. So if you're interested in the endurance side, Sparta Chicks, as you said, was my coaching and online community for women interested in endurance sports. As I said, it's everyday people like you and I who just have these slightly crazy goals that we love in our part-time. So that's one place to find me. You'll also find Sparta Chicks Radio over there, which is the podcast. It has been going for 4.5 years now. We're at episode 160-something. And again, interviewing mostly athletes, but some business owners, people who have achieved success in various aims. And my intention and goal with the podcast was to explore fear and self-doubt more than anything. How you achieve big goals when you're scared, when you're uncertain, when you're so scared that you want to go and hide. How do you navigate that in order to do the thing that you want? And I have actually asked almost every guest about their experience with the imposter syndrome too. So that's been a very interesting and diverse range of answers across the board. And the other place you can find me for my work more in the corporate space with individuals, teams and organisations around mindset and the imposter, building resilience and endurance, and around performance or high-performance teams, high-performance habits, you can find me at spartagen.com as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, and I'll include all those links in the show notes. And just finally, Jen, have you got any inspirational words of wisdom that you'd like to conclude the episode with?
How long have we got? No, I'm kidding. I go back to something I said before. It is that if there is one thing sports coaching has taught me that I now see in every aspect of life, it is this. You are capable of so much more than you can possibly imagine. The horizon that you see for yourself is just a false horizon. It is, so much, there's so much more you can do beyond that. So dig deep, back yourself, trust yourself, and go for it, because I just think life is too short to do anything less.
No, fantastic words, and totally agree after watching the Olympics, and I think that's what keeps us in awe of just the human capability. You just think, wow, we are capable of doing this sort of stuff, I think it's great concluding words given that we're watching the Olympics at this point in time. My
laptop is just sitting over there on the right now, I will confess. It's funny, have you seen the meme going around about something Bill Murray, I think, said on Twitter about how every Olympic event should have like a normal person in it to actually provide a benchmark or framework or something to show how exceptional these people are. I would love that, because I was looking even at some of the swimming times. This morning we're recording this, the 10-kilometre marathon swim was on, and I looked at the swim times and nearly cried, because I can't even do that for 1 kilometre in the pool, never mind what they swam in 10, the pace they swam at over 10K. So, yeah, that would be fun.
So very true. So very true, because I look at the marathon runners, the pace they run the whole 42 Ks at, some people could barely do it for 100 metres.
I couldn't do it for 50 metres, never mind 100, never mind a kilometre. So, yeah, it's just a testament to the ability of the human body and mind, I think.
Absolutely. And as you said, don't underestimate it. Don't underestimate the human potential. So thank you so much, Jen, for sharing all this wonderful expertise and wisdom with the listeners. And for the listeners, if you really enjoyed the episode, then please share it with others that could also benefit, that you may know that are struggling from the imposter syndrome or self-doubt or fear of failure, and we really have this sporting aspiration. Please share it with them, because they could benefit. And yes, stay tuned for more insightful episodes of Me and My Health Up. Thank you.